true, that would be a problem, right? But here's the deal. There were, just like there are today, there were different dating systems that were in use. For us, this is 2025, but not everybody in the world thinks this is the year 2025. The Muslims, for example, they have a different calendar. So even in this time period, there were different ways of measuring that were in place. So, for example, what is today? Today's the 12th. Is that right? So May the 12th, 2025. So if we had, let's say Nebuchadnezzar became king today, on May the 12th, 2025. Some people would say when you get to, most of us would probably say, when would his second year start? May 13th, 2026, right? So after he's been in office for 365 days, day 366, well, that's year 2. Some people do it that way, okay? There were also people at this time that they went by the actual calendar year, not the literal number of days. So, for example, if Nebuchadnezzar started on December 31st, 2025, then you get to January 1st, 2026, they would count that as 2 years, even though he's only reigned 2 days. But that's the second year of his reign, right? So obviously that's what happened here. They're using different, reckonings of time that's how they count either the 3rd year or the 4th year. Both methods were common in that time period, so it's not a contradiction, it's not a problem. All right, so let's go on verses 3 through 7. So we see here that he takes this group into captivity, Daniel being among them, and so the king gives instructions that what he wants is, he tells his ministers, I want you to select certain of these young Jewish men that we have brought into captivity from Judah, and I want you to train them for government service so that they can better serve me. And so when you go through, you read the passage, it says, of course, they have to be intelligent. It's hopefully you'd want people in the government to be intelligent. I'm not sure that always pans out, but that's what we'd like to have, right? And they needed to be of royal or noble blood, so that tells us Daniel probably was. They had to be able to learn the language of the Babylonians or the Chaldeans. We'll see those terms are usually used interchangeably. They got to be able to learn that language, okay? And so the goal, of course, what Nebuchadnezzar wants to do is turn them into Babylonians. I want them to forget about being Jews and about Judah, and let's just make them part of us. It's what he's hoping to do, which, of course, if that happens, that would corrupt them even further. Okay? And so you notice when you read through there that the king ordered that for these young men that were intelligent and without blemish and all those kind of things, he gave orders for them to be well fed from basically the same diet that he got. Okay? So if you're the king back then, just really like today, if you're a president or a prime minister or a king, what kind of food do you probably get compared to everybody else? Yeah, you're not eating at Crystal, right, if you're the president or you're a prime minister. So he's got the best food, right? So he says, I want these guys to get the same food I get. So they're going to get meat, and that would mean they're going to get alcoholic wine as well, and that's mentioned. That's the food of the king. And he says, so I want you to feed them with those, kind of fatten them up, so to speak. And it tells us that training is supposed to last for 3 years. Okay? And he says, at the end of that 3 years, I want all these men brought before me. Okay? So that's kind of what's going on. Now, among all these men that were selected, and we're not told how many the total number was, but the ones that were selected among the whole lot of Jews, and you got these special ones, there are 4. Okay, and these 4, they are going to stand out, even to Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't realize why they're standing out, but they're going to make a really good impression on him. Says, hey, you know what? I'm not sure, but there's something different about these 4 guys. Okay, and so they're really going to stand out. Now, these 4 men were Daniel, of course. He's going to be one of them. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So you're thinking, okay, Daniel, these other 3 guys, you might think, who? I've never heard of those guys. Actually, you have. But as I said, they were trying to assimilate them and turn them into Babylonians. And so the king is going to decree that they get Babylonian or Chaldean names. I don't care about your Jewish name. I want you to have these different names. So these other guys, you have heard of them. It's just they're normally called by their Babylonian names. So what do we have? Well, first of all, Daniel. His goes from easy to hard. Okay, so they're going to rename Daniel Belteshazzar. That's going to be his new name. That's his Babylonian name. So I prefer to call him Daniel because that's easier to pronounce. But that's what they're going to call him. Okay. Now there's something about a name, right? Names mean something, and so the name Daniel means God is my judge. Okay, which that's appropriate. Now, what is this name Belteshazzar? What does that mean? Well, one of the main gods of the Babylonians was a god by the name of Bel, B-E-L, which you'll notice, that's the first three letters here. Okay? Bel was one of their big gods, and so scholars, and there's some debate about this, but they think it means Bel is my protector. Okay, so the Babylonian god is my protector, which obviously Daniel would not agree with that, but he didn't have a whole lot of choice at this point. We're going to call you that whether you like it or not, so that's going to be his new name. Well, what about the other guys? Well, Hananiah, they're going to call him Shadrach. Now maybe you know where we're going. Right? Mishael, that's Meshach. What about Azariah? Who's he? Abednego. That's right. You go, now I've heard of those guys. Yeah, now I know who you're talking about. Because a lot of people haven't heard necessarily their Jewish names. Everybody calls them by these names. So this is how they're going to be referred to in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar and his ministers. Now, how old were these guys? Because that's kind of interesting too. So in verses 3 and 4, they're called children. So do you think it's talking about like little kids? You think they're little kids? We often say if it's children, that's what we're talking about. But my son is still my child. He's 22 years old. So, and when I was 40 years old, my mom still said I was her child. So, I didn't like that too much. But they're always your children. So we can use that term in different ways. But we usually think of that as, somebody small. In the New King James, it says young men. But King James, it says children. Now, the Hebrew word for that, it can be translated as little kids or it can be translated as older children. But the idea is they're young men. They're not, 30 or 40 or 50 years old. These are young men. Okay? And think about what Nebuchadnezzar wants them to do, right? So he wants them to learn the language, for one thing. So they've got to learn a whole foreign tongue. Is that easy to do? Especially not for little kids, right? So most people think, and there's no way to know for sure, but think they're probably between 15 to 20 years old. They're at least teenagers, something like that's probably what we're talking about. So they're very young men, but as I said, they're going to really impress Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so let's move on to verses 8 through 16. Let's come back to the menu. So they've got meat and they've got alcoholic wine, and that's what they've been commanded to eat. So is for a faithful Jew under the law of Moses, is that okay? No. It's not all right. So Daniel knew, even though that's the quote-unquote best food, Daniel knew, and so did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they all knew that if we eat that and we drink that, that's going to defile us. We really don't need to be eating and drinking that. So because that diet with the meat would have been unclean, a lot of it, and in the law of Moses, God said there are certain things you cannot eat. That would have violated that, and of course the wine. So they knew this is not something that we really need to be doing. The problem is, it's a command of the king. Okay, so what are you going to do about that? So Daniel, what he does is the men who are in charge of the captives, Daniel asked them for a different diet. He says, hey, could you give us something different? And most people, who's going to turn down the food of the king? But they did. He said, could you give us something different? So he talks about pulse. He said, can you give us pulse and water? Now, what's pulse? It's not what we say oftentimes. What? Yeah, veggies. Ugh, better him than me. Right, so he said, just give us vegetables and water. That way we're not defiling ourselves, we're not violating anything. So he asked them to do that. Okay. Well, the prince of the eunuchs, who we read that God had given Daniel favor with him, so they're on pretty good terms, And so that's who Daniel is at. Hey, could you, maybe we do a different diet instead. Well, the prince of the eunuchs, not a big fan of that plan. Whoa. No. You don't understand. The king has commanded you to eat this stuff. And it's great food. What's the matter with you, right? So he really doesn't want to do that. He says, no. We need to do what the king says, because he knew you can't say no to the king. And as we'll see, if you didn't already know, Nebuchadnezzar's not the nicest guy around. He's a very cruel man. Most absolute kings were, because there was no limit on their power. So they could play God. They'd do whatever they want. So if there's no restraint, we've heard that phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely, because it does. So it's not the kind of guy, you know what, no, I don't want to do what you said. You don't really want to do that to them. And so he's also afraid. He's like, look, if I feed you nothing but water and vegetables, you're going to be scrawny. And then when I present you in front of the king, and he looks at that, whose fault's that going to be? It's going to be the prince of the eunuchs, right? He's going to blame me because I'm the one that was supposed to be taking care of you. So I'm going to lose my head, literally, probably. Or if you're real unlucky, burn alive, because Nebuchadnezzar, he was a big fan of barbecue, and he would cook people. That's what he liked to do. So he said, you're going to get me killed if you want to do this. So Daniel says, well, what? Here, look. It's 3 years, right? 3 years before he takes the king. Give us a 10-day trial. Let us eat water and veggies for 10 days, and let's see how it goes. Because Daniel knew it would work. He wasn't afraid of that. Just give us 10 days. So he said, okay, fine, I'll give you 10, So they feed him that diet for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, guess what? They looked fatter and healthier than all the other Jews that had been eating the diet of the king. They were plumped up, and they looked great. They looked really, really healthy. And so at that point, the prince of eunuchs agreed, okay, we'll just keep you on this diet. So they didn't make him eat the food of the king. So appreciate Daniel for having the guts to stand up, because he was risking getting killed over something like that. But of course he didn't want to violate God's law, so the diet was changed. Now, so important lesson here for us, not only did Daniel have the knowledge of what God expected him to do, what else did he have? The courage to do it. Right? That's important. A lot of people might read the Bible and they might kind of know what it says, but if we don't live it, what good does that do us? In fact, it may be worse than people that never read it at all. On the day of judgment, well, Lord, I read the Bible. Yeah, but you didn't follow it. Yeah, but I read it. It's better than that guy. He didn't even read it. Probably worse. Well, you read it. You knew what to do. You just didn't do it. So Daniel, he had the courage. He had the faith. He had the conviction that I'm going to live my life. I'm not just going to have the knowledge, but I'm going to live the way God wants me to live. Okay? And remember, these are young guys. A lot of people, young people, you can't count on them. But you don't have to wait till you get older to be faithful to God. So these are very young men, and we know that the other 3 men agreed with Daniel and did the same thing. All right, verses 17 through 21. We see that God gave these 4 men, this is kind of why they stand out, God gave them a tremendous amount of knowledge. He gave them wisdom. And what kind of wisdom are we talking about? Godly or worldly? Godly wisdom, right? Because they had stood firm. They were faithful to God. They have not caved in, because as far as we know, maybe all the other Jews were just doing what they were told. But these guys did not do that. And they knew how cruel Nebuchadnezzar was, and yet they stood up and did the right thing. So God is going to bless them for that. Okay? Now, something that's especially important, so he gives them all this wisdom, this knowledge, but especially important for Daniel is he gives Daniel the ability to understand, to interpret, it says, all dreams. So there's not a dream out there that he can't figure out, whatever it is. Now, is that going to come in handy? A little bit. Daniel probably didn't even know that at the moment, right? But he's going to get this gift that he's really going to need. God gives him what he needs, right? So a good example, that's what God does for us too. He gives the faithful what we need, not necessarily what we want. I want a Lamborghini, but do I need it? Probably not. My wife would kill me, so if I tried to buy one. But I don't need that. That might be something I want, right? But God's going to give me what I need. So he gives Daniel what he needs here, and that's going to come in very handy. So as we said, Nebuchadnezzar, he's really impressed with these guys. No one else like him, like them. And we're not only talking about among the Jewish captives. Nebuchadnezzar realizes there's nobody else like them, even among my own people, among my own advisors, among my own ministers. There ain't nobody like these guys. Okay, so he doesn't know why that is, but he realizes it. And we see there in the book that Nebuchadnezzar considered them to be 10 times better than anybody else he had working for him. So that's a pretty great compliment coming from somebody like him. So 10 times better. Okay? Now, as we close out chapter 1, we see in the last verse, verse 21, Daniel continued even in the first year of King Cyrus. Okay, now who's King Cyrus? Well, he is going to be the king of the Medo-Persian Empire. We talked about them last week. Okay, so we talked about 4 kingdoms, the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. The Medo-Persians, they are going to conquer the Babylonians. So they will be the second empire when you talk about order. And so we see Daniel is going to last all the way, Daniel's going to last all the way through the Babylonians, and he's still going to be there when the Medo-Persians show up. Now, we saw last week, how long is the captivity? 70 years. So Daniel is going to be there for the whole time, and apparently a little bit past that. So he's going to be there for that whole 70 years while this goes about. So he lives to see the rise of the Babylonians, and then he's going to see the fall of the Babylonians. Okay? Cyrus will be the one that does what when he takes over? What does he do that's so significant? Yeah, tells them they can go back, right? So he's going to allow the Jews who want to, they can leave there and they can go back to their homeland. All of them won't go, but some of them will. But he's going to be the guy that decides he's willing to end the captivity that Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians did. Now, something really, really, really interesting about this, if we're not going to go look at that, but Isaiah chapters 44 and 45, if you go there, you'll see that Isaiah prophesied about this. Okay? He identified, here's what's so incredible, he identified Cyrus by name. He didn't just say a king's going to come and do something. He was very specific of who Cyrus was and what he was going to do. Okay? And this is about 150 years before it happened. About 100 years before Cyrus was even born. And yet, he called him specifically by name. So what does that tell us about the Bible? You know, the Bible is true, right? It's one more piece of proof that this is God's Word. How could he possibly know that? Okay? So you would think for us, that would be like saying, okay, I'm going to tell you who's going to be President of the United States in the year 2175. I'm going to tell you by name, and I'm going to tell you what he's going to do. Now, the good news is, y'all can't check me on it because we'll all be dead in 150 years, right? But if you could check, who thinks I could do that? Wow, no hands? Nobody has faith in me? I can't believe it. Right? Yeah, because I couldn't do it, right? I have no idea who's going to be president, or if the United States will even be here, or if the world will even be here 150 years from now. So how could I possibly predict and give you the specific name? And, I could say, well, yeah, president in 150 years, he's going to raise taxes. Wow, that's going out on a limb, right? There's a good bet he probably will, or she will, whoever it is, right? So that's what a lot of these people do, these so-called miracle workers and, fortune tellers. They give you something really vague that, well, of course that's probably going to happen, but I want the guy's name. I want to know what political party he's in. How much is the tax increase going to be? What month does it go in? I want some details, right? If you want to convince me that you know what you're talking about. And that's what Isaiah, he gave all these details. Only God could have known that. There's no way that Isaiah could have done it. So it's just, again, more proof that the Bible is inspired. All right, well, let's head over to chapter 2. First section, we're going to look at the first 13 verses. And here's where we see that Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, his first one. Probably not the first dream he ever had, but I mean the first one recorded in Daniel. And this dream troubled him so much that he said he couldn't sleep. You ever had a dream like that? A nightmare that kind of woke you up? And, you know, we've all had that. And usually, if you have something that's that startling, you typically remember what it was, right? But this troubles him so much, but he can't remember it. Okay, all he knows is, I think this was bad, whatever it was, you know, but he can't remember it. So he calls in all the wise men because he wants them to help him out. Okay, and so we see here Babylonian, Chaldean, again, they're pretty much used interchangeably. Here it's probably, when it says Chaldeans, it's probably talking about the educated class. He calls them in because they were all Chaldeans, right? But he calls them in and he wants their help with this dream that he can't remember, but he knows, you know, it's very troubling. Okay, and so you'll see here, it mentions Syriac in verse 4. And so we know that most of the Bible was written in two languages. Okay, the New Testament mostly written in Greek. The Old Testament mostly written in Hebrew. But there's a third language, and that's Aramaic. And there were some portions of the Bible that are written in Aramaic, and this is one of those portions. So really kind of starting with Daniel chapter 2 and verse 4, and going all the way up to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 28. That entire passage apparently was written in Aramaic, okay, or the Syrian language. So probably it was the official language of the court. This was a language that most everybody spoke, okay? And so we would call it the vernacular language, which again is just the idea, English, French, German, Spanish, those are all vernacular languages. The language in a country, that's what most everybody speaks. Okay, so this is, so you'll see that in verse 4, and you might go, what's he talking about? That's what that is. So these wise men, he calls them in, and they come in. The first thing they do is they praise Nebuchadnezzar, tell him how awesome he is. Okay, now why would they do that? Really good idea to do that, right? You're so awesome, you're so, you know, so that's the first thing they do. Tell him how great he is, butter him up a little bit, because they don't know, you know, what are we going to have to do here, right? So they praise him, and so he tells them, I want you to tell me what was in this dream. I don't remember the dream, but I want you to tell me. So they ask him, you need to tell us what was in the dream. If you'll tell us what was in the dream, we'll tell you what it means. So just tell us what was in the dream, and they'll interpret it. The problem is, like I said, he doesn't remember it. And there's no indication he's lying to him. He doesn't remember. He just knows that it was something that's really bothering him, but he doesn't remember what was in it. So the king wants to know two things from them. Number one, what was in it? What's in the dream? What was the dream about? You boys need to tell me. I mean, y'all supposedly have magical powers. You're magicians and sorcerers and all these kind of things, and astrologers, and you need to tell me what was in it. And then secondly, what does it mean? Once you tell me what's in it, then I want you to interpret what does it mean. Because I don't even remember it, but I'm pretty sure I don't remember what it means either. So you guys need to tell me these two things. Now, that makes it a lot harder for them if they don't even know what's in it. Because if they had known what was in it, they could probably make something up. Right? If you tell me what's in your dream, I can interpret it for you. It won't be right. But you won't know that. Oh, well, sure, this means that, you know. You can make something up. So this makes it a lot harder because they don't even know what was in it. But that's what he tells them, I really want you to do. And if they really had supernatural powers, they'd be able to do that, right? But they can't do it, obviously. So as we said, Nebuchadnezzar was known to be pretty hot-tempered and cruel and, not the nicest guy. And so it displeasing him, not a good idea for anybody to do. And look at Jeremiah 29, verse 22. This is one example. We already kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago. Jeremiah talks about him here in verse 22. And of them shall be taken up a curse by all the captivity of Judah, which are in Babylon, saying, the Lord make thee like Zedekiah and like Ahab, whom the king of Babylon roasted in the fire. Ouch. This is the kind of guy they're dealing with here. And now he's telling me, okay, you got to tell me what the dream is and then what does it mean? And we don't know what it is. So just in case they're not well motivated, we're going to see, though, he's going to use the stick and the carrot. First, the stick. He said, let me tell you something, boys. If you can't tell me what that dream was and what it means, I'm not just going to kill you. I'm going to dismember you. I'm going to cut you into little bitty pieces. And while I'm at it, probably going to burn your house to the ground. I'm going to destroy your property. No pressure. Just tell me what it is and what it means. That's all you got to do. Now, the good news, he said, on the other side, if you do tell me, then I'll give you great reward if you can do this thing for me. Okay, so like I said, a little bit of the stick, a little bit of the carrot. So by this point, they're probably petrified because they know they have no idea. So they're thinking, yeah, that reward, we're never going to live to see that. It's going to be the cut to pieces and, So they ask him again. If you just tell us what's in the dream, we'll interpret it for you. We'll tell you what it means. Just tell us what it is. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is a little too smart for him. Right? And again, he doesn't remember anyway. But he responds by telling them, I knew you would try to come up with some kind of excuse to stall for time. You need to tell me what it is, and you need to tell me what it means. Quit stalling. So he's not, wanting to cooperate with this. And so he knew that if they knew the details of the dream, they could do what I just said. They could lie to him and, make up something. How would he know whether it was true or false? He wouldn't, right? He'd just kind of have to take their word for it. So, but he knows if you can tell me what was in the dream, you can tell me what I dreamed, then I'm pretty sure I can trust your interpretation. If you can tell me the first part, you can tell me the second part and I'll believe you. But of course they can't do that. Okay, and so Nebuchadnezzar's probably thinking, I think if once they start telling me what was in the dream, that'll rattle my memory and I'll remember and I'll know they're telling the truth. Right, at least that's what he's counting on. So they respond, because I guess they figure they got nothing to lose at this point. He's going to cut them up anyway. So they respond by telling him, look, there's nobody on earth that could do what you've asked us to do. What you're asking is unreasonable, which normally you'd never tell him that. But when you're backed into a corner, he's going to kill us anyway. So it's just unreasonable. No, we don't know of any king that has ever asked his advisors to do what you're asking us to do. They always at least tell him what's in the dream, and then they, interpret it. So, of course, they don't know about Daniel and the one true God, because guess what? God is going to tell Daniel what's in the dream, and so he can interpret it. So this should have proved pretty conclusively to Nebuchadnezzar, should have proved to him what about these men? They don't really have any special powers. They claim to, but they really don't. As we said, anybody could give some kind of vague interpretation, but they don't have any details. So when you think about a lot of these, miracle workers today, these guys on TV, you send me $200 and I'll heal you. And they make these claims, and it's always vague. Well, I cured that guy's headache. Well, that guy had back trouble. Now his back doesn't hurt anymore. It's all stuff you can't prove, you can't verify. And even cancer, they'll say, well, she had cancer, but the cancer went away because I healed her. Well, some people just naturally get past it. It does happen. But they'll do things like that there's no way really to prove it, verify it, I want to tell them, say, well, look, why don't you go find blind people? If you can make them see, I'll believe you. If you can make the lame to walk, this guy's been in a wheelchair for 25 years, and you make him get up and walk, you've got my attention. Okay? Or what my father-in-law used to say, let's run down to the cemetery. You raise one, I'll raise the next one. And he said, in all the years I made that offer, nobody ever took him up on it. Wonder why? Because they couldn't do it. Those would be verifiable, bona fide, no doubt about it miracles, but these guys can't do that. Well, these men for Nebuchadnezzar, they can't do anything either. Okay? So, how do you think he's going to react to that? You think so? You don't think he said, that's okay, boys, don't worry about it? Yeah, he got a little upset that they could not do this for him. So he ordered not just them, but all the wise men throughout the Babylonian Empire. He says, I want them all killed. Even the ones that weren't in the room. I want them all killed. So he sends the soldiers out, go find them, round them up, arrest them, kill. I want them all dead. That's how furious he was about this. Well, the problem is that would include Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. They were among the wise men. They weren't in the room, but the order would have included them. Okay, so then we see in verses 14 through 18, so the soldiers go out and they go to arrest all these people. So they come out, and it talks about Arioch, who was the captain of the guard. And when he comes to arrest Daniel and his friends, because the king has ordered, hey, I got to kill, I'm supposed to kill everybody. Well, Daniel speaks with him. Now remember, Daniel has the wisdom of God. So he's going to be able to talk his way out of this. Okay? So he tells him, he said, look, why don't you take me to Nebuchadnezzar? Let me talk to the king. Before you kill all these people, let me talk to the king. And so he is taken before the king. He's allowed to talk to him. And Daniel requested a delay. If you'll just hold off a little bit, because Daniel needs to go pray to God. And if you'll just hold off, give me a little bit of time. He said, I can tell you what the dream is and I can interpret it for you. Through God. That's important. Daniel's going to give God all the credit. It's not me. But if you'll give me a little bit of time, God will give me this information. Okay? Now, strangely enough, you might think that Nebuchadnezzar is going to go, yeah, right. No, I said kill them, But he doesn't. He grants the delay. Seems a little generous on his part, right? But when you think about it, why would he grant the delay? Why would it make sense kind of for him to grant the delay? Even though it's kind of against his character. But why do you think he would do it? I want to know what the dream is, right? Yeah. So he wants to know. It's just killing him. He's got to find out what this is, right? So he says, okay, I'll give you a little bit of time. I don't know if this guy can tell me what it is, but maybe there's a chance. So, I can wait a few days before I mass murder everybody. I can give him a little bit of time. So he does that. So the delay is granted. And unlike the others who kept asking, if you just tell us what the dream is, right? There's no indication that Daniel ever asked him that. Daniel didn't do what they did. Well, if you'll just tell me what the dream is, he said, no, I'll tell you what the dream is, and I'll interpret it because God's going to tell me what it is. So he didn't even ask the same question. And so that probably impressed Nebuchadnezzar a little bit. He didn't even try to get it out of me, right? He just said, I can do this. So Daniel goes back to his other three friends, and they all pray that God would give Daniel this information about this dream. So what do you think is going to happen? Will God give it to him? He does. So verses 19 through 23, God answered the prayers. He sends a vision to Daniel and gives him all the information he needs. What's in the dream, what it means. He gives him everything that he needs. Okay? Now, something that's kind of interesting there, you see in verse 19 there in chapter 2, then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Now that seems kind of odd because when we think about God and blessing, I don't bless God. God blesses me. Right? God blesses people. People don't bless God, and yet it says Daniel blessed God. What do you think that means? He gave him the credit, right? He's thanking and praising God because God gave him all the information that he needs, because as we're going to see, not just to save himself and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but also he's going to plead for all the other wise men that Nebuchadnezzar not kill them too. So he blessed God, meaning he's praising God, he's thanking God, and he's going to give God the total credit for this, when he could have, a lot of people would have taken the credit for himself. Okay, Daniel also acknowledges here that the only reason that Nebuchadnezzar is king, and this point's going to be driven home to Nebuchadnezzar eventually, the only reason he's king is because why? Because God put him there. God allowed him to be king. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't see it that way, but we're going to see how that all plays out, right? So he acknowledges that God, he's the one that put this king and every king in power, and he knows that God can use kings, even the wicked ones, like Nebuchadnezzar. He can use them for his own purposes, and we already know that it's been prophesied, yeah, I'm going to use Nebuchadnezzar to punish Judah, but eventually what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the Babylonians? They're going to go down, they're going to get theirs, okay? So God's like, relax, I'm in charge, I got this under control. Yes, I'm using them, but they're going to be punished too. Because some people, they'll read this and go, why doesn't he punish the truly wicked ones? He will, right? But Judah, in a sense, is more wicked because they knew what God wanted and they just refused to do it. Okay? So the Babylonians, I mean, they're not, interested in the law of Moses or any of that stuff. Okay? So Daniel knows he put Nebuchadnezzar there. He can remove him when he wants. He can use him for whatever purpose. Think about, we also see that in the book of Exodus, don't we? With Pharaoh and Moses. It specifically says Pharaoh, that particular Pharaoh was there because God chose him, because God knew what he would do, and it gave God the opportunity to defeat Pharaoh, and Pharaoh will be taken down, but God will use him for a brief period of time for his own purposes. So the Old Testament's full of examples of God doing that. So again, Daniel, the main thing is he's going to give God the credit for all this. He doesn't take any credit for himself, doesn't claim any special power for himself other than God's with him. Okay? So verses 24 through 30, Daniel goes back to the captain of the guard, to Arioch, and he says, take me to the king. I've got the information that he needs. I prayed to God. He gave it to me. I can do this. Okay? This is when Daniel pleads for the other wise men, don't kill those guys either. Okay, so he's not just doing it for himself. So he pleads for their life, but he also still reminds Nebuchadnezzar that, remember, they couldn't answer your question. But I still don't want you to kill them. But remember, they couldn't answer your question. I can, not because of me, but because of what? Because of God. That's what you need to learn, King, that God is greater than your gods. They're all false. Okay, so he wants the king to try to understand that, and it's going to take a while. Okay, so again, he's given God all the credit. He wants Nebuchadnezzar to see that's who the true God is. Okay, now Daniel reveals. He says, "I'm going to tell you something about this dream. That the dream deals with future events. It's not about the past or the present, but it deals with future events. And it talks about latter days in verse 28 and the hereafter in verse 29. Simply means it hasn't come to pass yet, but it will. It's guaranteed to happen. It's going to happen at a later time. Okay? And when Daniel reveals this information, it's going to cause the king to exalt him to a really high position. So it would have been tempting for Daniel to take the credit. Okay? What do you think the other wise men would have done? They'd have taken all the credit for themselves, of course. Right? Daniel, he never does that. He's always humbles himself. It's not about me, it's about the Lord. And he gave me all this information. He deserves the credit. He deserves the glory. And he's trying to get Nebuchadnezzar to understand that. Okay? But he wants him to know, yeah, I'm going to do something that all those other guys couldn't do. But that's because they don't have God and I do. And that's why I'm going to be able to do this. Okay? All right. And so that brings us to verses 31 through 35. So we're going to pause it right there as we're out of time. So we'll see here, this is where the dream is revealed. So Daniel's going to tell him, first of all, here's what was in your dream. And then Daniel's going to tell him, now here's what it means, what was in your dream. Okay? So anybody have any questions, comments? Okay. So you don't have anything due next week. We're pretty close to getting through with chapter 2, but not quite. So and again, I'm not going to be here next week. Jim's going to teach for a couple hours, then I'll do a couple hours the week after that, and we'll conclude then. So thank you for your kind attention, and we are through.